My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowski Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. Politics never ends, and even as we emerge from a national election that threatens upheaval not only here at home but across the globe, New Yorkers are entering our own municipal election year in 2025. Voters will be casting ballots for mayor, public advocate, comptroller, borough presidents, all 51 city council members, and district attorneys in Brooklyn and Manhattan. Even as we face an incoming Trump administration with demonstrated antipathy to the kind of diversity we embrace here in the city, especially when it comes to the immigration status of hundreds of thousands of us, there are serious fiscal challenges that will immediately face whoever is elected next year. The Citizens Budget Commission, for example, projects an $8 billion budget deficit for 2026. We're joined by four New Yorkers who take part in, or in one case cover, the debate over the future of the city, which will be played out in the 2025 municipal elections. Gail Brewer is a city council member representing Midtown Manhattan and the West Side, previously served as Manhattan Borough President. Michael Benjamin is a member of the New York Post editorial board and a former state assembly member. Rob Snyder is professor emeritus in journalism and American studies at Rutgers University and serves as Manhattan Borough historian, one of the cooler titles in the city. He is also the author of the upcoming book, When the City Stopped, Stories from New York's Essential Workers, an oral history of frontline workers during the COVID crisis. And Gwyn Hogan is a reporter at thecity.nyc, which if you do not read regularly, you should, who will tell us what it all means. Gail, you're up for re-election next year. You've been with a mayor who's indicted, with a new administration that is not very friendly, at least in its rhetoric, to New York City, even if it's led by an original New Yorker. Set up this discussion. Are we, what's happening?
Well, I think two things. First of all, on the government side, with the current president and the current mayor, even with all the challenges, good government more or less continues. We obviously passed a housing zoning bill. And then today, we were talking in the city council about the fact that the city council is suing the mayor based on an executive order to do with whether or not people at Rikers are in solitary confinement. So that's kind of the everyday, not to mention routine. Routine affairs and what's the real purpose of an executive order. So that's always conflict, I would say, between the mayor and the city council. But we passed legislation. There are lots of bills that are being voted on next week in the city council. The police today, and maybe it was your paper, but one of them stated something that I think is important. What's going on the streets? Mental health and public safety across the board, number one issue. And in some precincts, the mayor's managed to bring, which I think should be in every precinct, fire, health, social services, police, everybody to confront whatever crimes and support for the neighborhood are going on. Apparently it's working. Well, it should go on in every neighborhood, mine included. We've had shootings on the West Side that we've never had before. I put it on mental health post-pandemic. I agree with Rob tremendously about that. So that's one aspect. Government continued, but lots more not clear about what's going to happen under the Trump administration. I'm very concerned about the migrants. I have people in my neighborhood who say get rid of them, I'm afraid. And of course, I feel very strongly, along with Ruth Messenger and others, that they add to the workforce. The schools benefited. We lost so many students. I can't tell you how beneficial these families are to the school. So I think if you ask what's our number one worry for me, it's the schools and the migrant families.
And overall the immigration issue. Rob,
yes.
City and city government did change very profoundly during the pandemic. And, it kind of started, and the closure started under de Blasio, but they continued under Adams. How has that changed things? Are we past it?
We are not out of the pandemic at all. This is the first mayoral election since the end of the pandemic in 2023. And Mayor Adams inherited lots of bad feelings, lots of problems that are yet unresolved. Everything from crime to public health to changes in how the city's economy works, changes in our tax base. All these things are yet to be worked through. And if we saw one thing in the pandemic, there was a great sense of solidarity in the first year of the pandemic, clapping every night for essential workers. But once the vaccines came in, New Yorkers were much more at odds with each other than they were before that. And those divisions are still out there. I think they have something to do with Donald Trump doing better this year in the election than he did 4 years ago in the city.
Politically, Donald Trump's win was, even though we're an ardently Democratic city, was frankly reflected within the city. You cover mainly Brooklyn, and we first saw it in 2022 and 2024, significant Republican gains, especially in southern Brooklyn. A lot of the Chinese American communities, Staten Island's been traditionally Republican, but now it's clearly bled into it. Is that a permanent change? How has that political landscape changed?
Yeah, I think the Chinese American community is a really good example of a shift that's been happening for many years now, that sort of started under de Blasio with topics like the SHSAT, that the Chinese American
Specialized high school
community,
admissions test.
Correct. That the Chinese American community was very interested in protecting, and they were concerned about doing away with that. There's a big standardized testing culture, and they're overrepresented in the city's specialized high schools, and that became an issue that began to drive some community activists to the right, away from the Democratic Party. We then saw the shift continue with issues around bail reform, sort of after COVID, when that community was concerned about anti-Asian hate crimes, and then we've seen them sort of overlay onto the latest issue, which is on top of mind for a lot of voters in South Brooklyn that I spoke with this election cycle, which was the arrival of so many migrants to the city. Even though many of the people that I talked to were first generation, had migrated from China at some point in the past couple decades, we're still concerned about the latest arrivals. And that obviously was not exclusive to the Asian American community. I think that issue, given the number of shelters that the city had to open, and Mayor Eric Adams' stress on how many resources that the city had to devote to this that they could have been spending elsewhere without any support, or with limited support from the federal government in that time, I think was another issue that sort of pushed that community a little bit more to the right this election cycle.
Michael, this is it a move to the right? Is it a move to the middle? I mean, this is, we have, I actually looked up all the mayoral candidates. I tried to, this wasn't an easy year. We have Adams, we have Brad Lander, we have Senator Jessica Ramos, we have Andrew Cuomo potentially, we have Assemblyman Zoran Mamdani from Queens, we have Senator Zelnor Myrie from Brooklyn, we have former Assemblyman Michael Blake is thinking about it, and then we have Scott Stringer, and we have potentially 4 people on the Republican side. We have an independent, and Attorney Jim Walden. Is that normal? Is that chaos?
No, it's not chaos. It's for me, it's democracy, bringing the vote out. It's also part of ranked choice voting, because it doesn't matter if you have 8. It's no longer a plurality gets you elected. It's getting a majority of votes based on how ranked choice voting actually works. But I think most importantly, the election next year will be a referendum on Mayor Adams and the policies and what's transpired over the last 4 years.
And the indictment.
Yeah, well, and the indictment, of course. For those who actually understand what the indictment is all about, some people think it's only about business class tickets, when there are some really serious campaign finance violations, both on the state, federal, and local level, that really require, in my view, for there to be a trial and for it all to be sorted out. And it's
Assuming there's a trial.
I'm on the side that there will be a trial, that the president is not going to interfere with the decisions of the Southern District and helping the mayor out by getting rid of his case. I don't think that's going to happen, personally. But also, I think what's been transpiring, too, is that, yes, but a move to the right. I don't necessarily think it's a move to the right. I think it's voters who hadn't been active before, who were in the immigrant community, who already had those sort of leanings. But because of what's transpired, they're actually going out and voting, and they're voting their preferences, which tends to be more to the right. If you look at the culture of many of the immigrant groups in New York, there is a tendency to be, in our view, right-wing, to be, I guess, liberal in some policies, but when it comes to social and law and order, they're on the side of order, and we tend to associate that with the right wing. I think they're voting their preferences.
Right wing is too simplistic.
It's too
a term.
simplistic.
Right,
I
agreed.
think they're more voting their values. They're voting their local concerns, which they feel may not have been addressed by this administration and others. And so there's a great deal of more activism. Gwen pointed out, many of the Asian Americans, Chinese Americans come out because of the threat to the specialized high schools, the anti-Asian hate that they've experienced from all around New York that hasn't really been addressed. And I think that's what's driving people to vote, and then they're looking for candidates who will address that. The election, I think, for mayor will be more of a left-right, as they're going to try to tag Mayor Adams as the Trump candidate, as the Trump Democrat. And he'll be hit from folks on the left and maybe a couple in the middle, like my old colleague, Scott Stringer, will try to do that. And then I think everybody's going to pay attention to the public advocates race or the local council race.
Or the comptroller's race.
Or the comptroller. But I think, when you look at the city council, that's the most important thing for most people. Because if you're really dissatisfied with your neighborhood, well, the person you want to look at is your council member. But it appears that, at least in my view, it's been the case where incumbents have always had the advantage. And even in the era of ranked choice voting, I think it still continues.
Gail, you have Brad Lander running for mayor, which has caused a typical case of musical chairs, where you have Mark Levine running for comptroller, Assemblywoman Raj Kumar running for comptroller. Those all open up seats, and everybody tries to move up one. Does politics overwhelm government?
I don't think so, because don't forget, many of these people running are term limited. If you, I think also Justin.
Well, Mark's not term limited.
No, but Justin Brandon is term limited. He's running for controller. Powers is term limited. So, or else the other person running is persons who are on the state level, and they don't.
And it's a free run because
they're not going to lose their
not
seat
up for re-election.
So it's not. It's more. It's. I think that if Mr. Lander continues, because again, he could pull out. And then all of that
And then
domino,
everybody will go back.
Right, go back to their current position, or not, if they don't have one. I don't know what's going to happen with him. So I don't think that it's disruptive. What is disruptive, and I'm not a believer in 8 years of term limits for the city council, because that does create the musical chairs. Going to the state, coming back to the city council, and not getting enough done in the city council. I need at least 12 years. That's what I had in my first go-around. And it makes a huge difference, in my opinion. I know we're not going to get rid of them, because the public hates politicians. And, too much time for them is not a good thing in their mind. But I don't think that this musical chairs, which is running for seats that are available, is anything different than... Government doesn't get affected by it, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think it does. I mean, some people might, but I don't. Mayor is a different story.
Rob, talking about particular groups that are more likely to be more conservative or less aligned with the kind of left liberals that that have kind of dominated a lot of the conversation. This has happened in this city, and even in Manhattan, even in sainted liberal Manhattan. This has happened over the years.
New York's reputation for liberalism is highly exaggerated. Even in the days of LaGuardia and Lindsay, there were conservative strongholds in Queens, in Brooklyn, and in Staten Island. And New Yorkers have a pattern of electing Republicans or moderate Democrats in times of crisis. Think back, Bloomberg, Giuliani, Koch. These are all moderate to conservative mayors in many ways who got lots of votes because they offered the idea of stability. And Adams was part of that.
Right.
Adams drew on that, exactly. And we are clearly in a time when people feel really unsteady. They want a steady hand. And if Adams can't provide that, people are going to look for someone else who can.
Michael brought up ranked choice voting. And one of the ideas of ranked choice voting is you get to rank somebody first, second, third, and fourth. It's the idea is you avoid runoffs, and B, you discourage people from attacking some of your opponents because you want to draw their support. And the sense is that, can the progressive side build up enough to overtake Mayor Adams, who and God knows what's going to happen with Andrew Cuomo. I don't know what to say about Andrew Cuomo, if he's going to run or he's not. And Stringer is kind of in that mix in the middle somewhere. So it's can a leftist, Mamdani, the assemblyman from Queens, is kind of from the Democratic Socialist of America. And anybody, he seems to be the most, and Senator Ramos, I think, is pretty, but she's more of a pro-labor candidate, I think, than she is necessarily a DSA candidate. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that this is going to be a really, we did have ranked choice voting in 2021, obviously. That was like a big test on how it was going to work. Now we've had sort of a few years to educate people. And I think this is going to be a really interesting moment to see how the system works. We've already seen the UAW come out with a joint endorsement this past, just a few days ago, where they were basically saying, don't rank Mayor Adams,
right.
Rank Brad Lander, Jessica Ramos, and Zoran Mondami. Those are our 3 people that we would want you to support. And I think that we saw a little bit of that kind of in the 11th hour of the 2021 mayoral primary. I'm blanking on the specifics, but I think it was Andrew Yang, and I'm not remembering who the other candidate was, but it was 3 days before the election. If this is a strategy that people are really tapping into, I think it will be, I think there's much more time to kind of, to work that
through.
side. Yeah, and obviously we had in that election, Scott Stringer's campaign also kind of implode in the last minute, which sort of sent the left.
Well, I also
reeling.
have this theory that I've always had this theory that the reason that you had a lot of progressive candidates, the Maya Wileys of the world, I believe that Ms. Morales was in that race, and they talked in particular about bail reform and police issues. They talked about how communities of color, poor communities, are disproportionately the victim of unfair policing. And what Adams pointed out is that those communities are also disproportionately the victims of crime. And that instead of talking about those communities, he talked to those communities. I'm thinking about home-owning black communities in Southeast Queens and stuff like that. So go ahead.
I think they're the same folks who will prevail in electing their candidates for mayor. I really don't believe the far left, the Mamdanis of the world, the Ramoses, and the others have a very deep support in New York City among the electorate. I think it's Scott Stringer, it's Mayor Adams, it's Andrew Cuomo should he run. And what helped and what ranked choice voting has done, and when I've looked at it, it's really helped moderates overcome the left liberal ideological extremes. And I think the same thing could happen here. What helped the mayor was that there were a number of, I guess you would say, moderate candidates who ran. He was the strongest of them. And anybody who voted for moderate was going to make him their second choice. And I think that's what happened for him. I don't see a Zelnor Myrie supporter making Mamdani their second choice or Senator Ramos their second choice. I see them making either Andrew Cuomo or Mayor Adams their second choice, and that helps him as he builds towards.
Because after the first round, if you don't, your candidate is out, then your second choice becomes your first, and that cycling eventually creates somebody who has 51%.
And the left can't help themselves. They're going to say something that's really absurd, and it's going to turn off a great portion of the electorate. Yeah. And I expect Mr. Mamdani and Ms. Ramos to do that. Ms. Ramos also has the problem of Puerto Rican voters in the community are really upset with her with what happened to Judge Hector LaSalle in her torpedoing his candidacy and saying that.
Just so you know, Hector LaSalle was nominated by the governor to be the chief judge of the Court of Appeals and was sunk by a kind of a lefty attack on him that I personally did not think was fair, but she was part of that.
It was unfair and distasteful, and she famously said that ethnic identity does not count anymore. But yet now she's running for mayor, and she wants to appeal to Latinos across the city. And the Puerto Ricans are saying, we're not having it.
I mean,
here's the thing about...
I was going to say, I speak a lot to the cops, and it's interesting. They are very clear that nobody wants to be a cop anymore, and they say that to everybody. And they also point out that the classes are going to be really small, even though there's one in January and some in the spring. And they, a lot of these groups go to meetings to discuss public safety, be it at the precinct or at the community board or in your civic association or in your black association. they are really clear. It's not just bail. They're concerned more, and not even just the district attorney, to be honest with you, which is always what you hear, but they're concerned about how the process works in general. The fact that you have to share as a DA with the plaintiff's attorney all the information, discovery as it's called. They have really specific concerns. So I'm just letting you know, people are listening to that. And the NYCHA community, people don't realize that's a really conservative community. They love the cops. And then you take some of, Rob's analysis that he just made about this is really a conservative city. When I was at a huge gala, I go to galas, it seems like every night, in Manhattan, in this time of the year, and, a progressive nonprofit, and the director said, look at this audience, I don't know, 500 people. They're all going to vote for Cuomo if they have the opportunity. They're not going to go to a progressive candidate. So if you don't do Cuomo, then I think left is the mayor. Who's left, not left. Who's left is the mayor.
Well, Stringer is trying to play in that.
He is, but they didn't mention his name.
Right.
I'm just letting you know, if you got the Manhattan liberals, so-called, I don't know what you call them anymore, and then you've got all these other communities that Rob mentioned, it's a more conservative candidate. That's what people are looking for, I think.
The wrinkle in this, I think, and it doesn't align easily with left and right, is affordable housing. The city needs lots more affordable housing. City of Yes is a start. It's not going to solve the problem by itself. And where that gets built is where there's space to build housing. But some of the places where there's space to build housing is in those very neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Queens where more conservative voters rallied to the mayor or rallied to Donald Trump in the presidential election. The candidate who poses a plausible, strong beginning to a solution to this problem is going to get support from unexpected quarters.
Well, but
it's very, very hard to pull that off.
The governor tried to do that in her housing plan.
Right.
It was in the suburbs, especially on Long Island, where she wanted to encourage housing construction around Long Island Railroad stops, which would have overridden local zoning and was just slapped down by an awful lot of people, not just liberals, conservatives. I mean, it was a community control kind of an argument. One of the things that is not being discussed here, Michael brought it up, is the question of identity politics. And I do think that part of I believe the Trump win was essentially a cultural phenomenon more than it was anything else. And Jessica Ramos trying to play a Latino card, trying to draw support because she's the most, arguably one of the most significant Latino mayoral candidates we've ever had. Does identity politics still work? I mean, we remember when Guillermo Linares was the first Dominican elected, and Puerto Ricans were not ready to support him. They were not ready to pass the torch. I mean, is identity politics as intense a factor as it was?
It's intense and it's much more plural because the wave of immigration that brought New York City back to life from the 70s and 80s on had more diverse array of groups than any surge in immigration
influx
before. And Africans from many different countries,
yes.
Latinos from many different countries. In the past, Irish and Germans, Jews and Italians, African Americans and Puerto Ricans. It's the rule of twos. In Queens now, you have more than 100 languages spoken in some neighborhoods. You can't make a simple appeal to Latinos or Asians and expect that everybody's going to hear it in the same way. There are too many national and ethnic groups who have their own interests, and they don't necessarily see them aligning perfectly with other people who came from the same continent.
So it's about what the issues are. If you're a person who's housed, but you're concerned about your adult child who's still living with you because he or she can't find their own apartment because it's unaffordable, you're going to think about the candidate who's going to offer the proper housing plan so your child can be successful and live on his or her own. I think you campaign, yes, you can do the identity politics part, but you're going to also focus on what do they have in common as far as their policy concerns. Education, housing, employment, and public safety. It's really huge in the minds of many, many people, particularly those who go to work riding the subways or public buses. We can see the disorder this morning on my train coming into the post. Every car, as I walked down, had somebody sleeping on a bench and depriving a commuter from being able to sit comfortably on his or her way to work. And for a person who looks at what the mayor is doing and you see this, you wonder, well, you said you're helping them get off the subway and get into shelter, get into care. So why is it at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm seeing a homeless person sleeping on a subway bench on the subway? What's not working here?
Because I also believe that the reason there was a Democratic wave in 2022 in Congress all across the country, except in New York, where there was a Republican wave that sent 3 or 4 Republicans taking Democratic seats. And I believe that was because of the reaction to bail reform and the sense of a lack of accountability and the removal of judicial discretion. This year, some of those flipped back to the Democratic side, even though Trump won and the Republicans held house. I mean, the Chinese American community, we're looking at them because there's an ethnic identity. But is that identity politics or is it other issues?
Well, I think there are like some really interesting New York City specifics to look at, like because of our complex compilation of immigrants from all over the world. Like, for example, in South Brooklyn, you have a big influx of folks from former Soviet Union, and they are deeply Republican for a variety of other reasons that have shifted that community also to the right. So like on the one hand, you have these specific cultural reasons, but then like when you talk to people, they're getting their own news from YouTube channels, and like the same reasons why the electorate shifted towards Trump this reason on a national scale are also playing out, as people are getting information in different forums than they were even just 4 years ago during the last presidential election.
Well, I believe actually that the media question is really paramount. And when I grew up, I've made this point before in this show, there were 7 English language papers, the Post, the Mirror, the Journal, the Herald, the Telegram, the News, the Times. They were ideologically different, but they all agreed on the same facts, and then they fought over them. With the advent of the internet and cable TV, people have gone to their ideological silos, and they are not agreeing on facts that they can argue about. I think that the national election was probably the best example. There wasn't an agreement on facts.
Right. Well, the other thing I was going to say is big on languages. People actually don't speak English. We're obviously a very highly foreign-born city. But when you're trying to get information out to people, this is a constant discussion in the city council. How many languages can you have for the voting machines? How many languages can you have for human resources administration? And you could have hundreds, but guess what? People literally don't leave their language, particularly older people. So therefore, if you're asking New Yorkers to learn about all these different things, first of all, we don't vote, and even if we can vote, we're very low, 49th out of in the
49th
whole
out of 50
out of
cities.
50, unbelievable. I think only El Paso is worse. So then you ask why.
Which is even a more heavily immigrant city than
Right.
New York.
So what I'm just saying is, it's interesting to me when you're trying to communicate for benefits that people don't hear about them. They only talk literally to a community that is self-selecting, not to mention media. But the language is a huge issue. I don't know how to overcome it. We have English classes and so on. But I want to point that out, that this is a city of identity politics and identity language and identity community, and we don't leave it.
I think the voter turnout question is really interesting. We have historically abysmal voter turnout. And all the good government groups have said over and over again, if you consolidated elections and had them all when the presidential election was, you would increase turnout tremendously.
It would not.
Well, that's the question.
It'll drown out local issues because everybody be focused on who's running for president and who's running for governor, and it'll just wipe out local issues. I think holding the off year as we hold it for New York City makes the most sense for us. And I think other localities outside of New York are saying the same thing because they want their issues heard. They don't want to have it subsumed by a debate over who's running for president or who's running for governor or other issues that are outside the local concerns.
I think it's us, New Jersey, and Virginia are the ones who hold, governors in those states, but that's
an it's a relief not to have to cover them all at once.
It's a very
but I do think more people would,
Yeah, Michael's got an interesting point. I mean, you save money if you have fewer elections. And the other thing that people say, I don't know if it's true, is that people get, I don't know what you call election tired. Don't forget, in some years now we've had 4 elections. right? And so that's another reason why people don't vote. I don't know.
Do you have an opinion on whether you should have even year municipal elections?
I did sign a resolution in the city council for similar elections, thinking that maybe more people would vote. On the other hand, Michael's right. I do think that people will not pay attention to, public safety and whether you need social workers and cops or whatever the local issue is. They'll just think, people when they vote, they don't really care who's going to fix the road. They blame the city council or they blame the president, whoever didn't do the work according to them. And I think if you lose that, that's a challenge, because it's supposed to be the local mayor and city council who are supposed to fix the road or fix the school or
let's
whatever.
talk just for a brief, and then I want to see if anybody has questions. If the impact of the Trump ascension, re-ascension, if you will, I guess, and what he says he wants to do, which is, in some ways a dagger aimed at New York and at New York City when it comes to immigration, when it comes to a whole range of issues. What level of concern do you, I don't know, maybe I should start with you because you're in government, but what level of concern do you have?
It's tremendous. I think it was something close to $8 billion just to start with between, Title I, housing subsidies, et cetera, could in fact be implicated. Are we going to get any money for NYCHA? The list is endless.
For the City Housing Authority.
For the City Housing Authority and for housing and healthcare, Medicaid. What can you do to Medicaid? It's frightening in terms of what could be impacted by federal cuts. And you're going to get rid of the Department of Education? What does that mean? So we don't know. It's almost, for me, it's almost too much to imagine, but we have to focus on it. The first focus has been immigration and has been the groups that are coalescing around immigrants. That's been the first, but nobody knows from then on.
Which was the case in 2017.
With the Muslim ban, that was the first issue.
I mean, I think there's a big concern if you have large roundups of immigrants on two factors. One is governors aren't going to like to see the National Guard federalized and sent out. Guardsmen, and I know people in the National Guard, I had students who were in the National Guard, they are not living apart from immigrants. They have neighbors, friends, relatives who are all immigrants. They're not going to jump for the chance to arrest their
Some of them are immigrants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then finally, the other problem that you're going to face is it will drive people into an underground economy and an underground life, exactly the thing the NYPD did not want to see happen, that Rudy Giuliani did not want to see happen with undocumented immigrants. Because once they're living in an underground economy, they don't call the police, they don't call social workers, they're victims and sometimes perpetrators in an underground world.
It was Ed Koch who promulgated the order that we would not, as a city, immigration's a federal issue. We're a city. We will not cooperate with federal immigration authorities when they come and try to, do this kind of stuff on the streets. I mean,
I think that's why the president-elect, Donald Trump, is sort of backing away from mass deportation and now talking about targeting criminal aliens. I don't think there's much disagreement about the need and the desire to deport persons who've committed serious crimes in the United States who don't belong here legally, and to try to, once they're convicted of a crime locally, to then try to return them to their home country.
but he's also talking about going after birthright citizenship.
Yeah,
which is very.
How does he do that even legally?
Yeah,
it's a constitutional amendment that guarantees that.
For his constituents, because no one is going to get rid of birthright citizenship. They're going to try to do sort of piecemeal parts of it and try to trigger a Supreme Court case to try to reduce the precedent. What is it, Wang Kim Yuk, I think?
It was a Chinese man who was in the 1880s, actually. There was at the Museum of the Chinese in America, I learned about it, who was born here, left, came back. They tried to bar him from coming back, and the ruling was no, he was born here, he's a citizen. It's actually a Chinese.
Yes, and that precedent has stood for a long time. It's not going to be changed, and he can't change it via executive order. It's going to require a Supreme Court case that will have to overturn it, and I don't think there's enough votes in the Supreme Court to overturn that precedent.
Tell us your name and your campus, please.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Bryant Kearney. I am here representing CUNY SLU. Good afternoon,
School
everyone.
of Labor and Urban Studies?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, as a native New Yorker, as a Brooklynite, as a mom, as a municipal worker that currently works at Rikers Island right now. It's so much going on, right? So for me, my question is, how does the mental health status in the unhoused population work in 2025? Because for me, that's one of the issues, the pressing issues.
Yes.
Sitting on the train, walking past people, running after you, and then working at Rikers Island and my coworkers having to deal with mental health population PICs that really don't belong there. They believe they belong in a mental hospital.
Right, it's a right.
You understand?
Yeah, I feel this is my number one issue, and I really appreciate the question. I believe that the hospital, right now, and you know this, Bellevue only has 19 beds for those who want to go be assigned from correctional health to a hospital. Only 19, as opposed to people going to Rikers. The mayor's put in money, supposedly, for January to have 110. That's not enough. And instead of going, the judge says, you know, you're going to go somewhere, you're going to go to Rikers. They don't want to do that, so they put them back on the street sometimes. There should be hospital beds with psychiatrists and psychologists to address that concern, not going to Rikers. We can't get anywhere with this. That's what I believe, and you talk to Dr. Katz, who's head of health and hospitals. He says the same thing. He says, I want a building, I want a place for people who are mentally ill, go with the kind of services. He says, goodness, we can serve 57,000 migrants. Why can't we serve, 3,000 people with mental illness? We need that.
So, yes, ma'am, your name and your campus, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carla Sanchez. I'm from CUNY BA and Hunter College. And my question regards public safety. Do you guys feel that video surveillance and the adoption of facial recognition will be an important upcoming election topic, especially after the recent high-profile shooting atop of the influx of migrants and protests over the past few months?
Anybody want to jump in on that?
I like technology. I think technology has been very helpful in solving crimes, particularly the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO, as well as cameras being useful in apprehending suspects in other crimes. Remember 30 years ago, you had local civil liberties folks who were opposed to cameras on city streets. Well, as a result of public cameras in ATMs, grocery stores, the police cameras, we can now trace alleged perpetrators and catch them and to share their captured photographs, whether it's in the subway or elsewhere, with the public to begin to apprehend those individuals and to provide some level of justice for crime victims. But to get back to what Gail said in reference to Rikers, your colleagues still want to close Rikers, and the substitute jails are not sufficient size to enable us to not only house those who are mentally ill and charged with crimes, but to house other dangerous criminals who've been accused here in New York. I mean, not one of the proposed replacement jails is going to be a facility for persons with serious mental illness who really don't belong on Rikers or in any prison facility, but require treatment that's secure. So we need to sort of solve that, and we need to push Governor Hochul, who claimed over the last 2 years she's been releasing more state money to open up more mental health beds across the state of New York.
But this is
promising,
also
I think, 250 in New York, and we still haven't seen those beds.
But this is also a decades-old debate from when we, what was called the deinstitutionalization movement, and which reacted to too many people being put in institutions. So,
Right.
And it's also tied up to the affordable housing crisis.
Yes.
Cheap places to live are not available. That's why some people live on the street.
But when I was in the legislature, I supported supportive housing in my own assembly district in opposition to my own community boards, because it's important for us to provide mental health services for our neighbors, our cousins, our sons, our daughters. And we supported New York 1, 2, and 3 to provide supportive housing. We need much more of that. And it's not just support, and the persons who are on the streets acting out, they really do need to be civilly committed, and in my view, needs to be forced medication, because medication works. And to me, it's inhuman for us to allow persons who are mentally ill and a danger to themselves, and not only the public, but to themselves, to walk around New York being a danger. We need to help them. And if it requires having to be in a particular facility and get regularized treatment medication and talk therapy, we need to do that, and we need to set aside our concerns about their civil liberties. Nobody has a civil liberty to be insane on our city streets.
Yeah, I
and
mean, there's a
endanger
good
themselves.
balance that could be met, but they will not go to a shelter. And so stop trying to force people to go to a shelter that has 14, 15 beds in the room. I talked to them. They're only going to go, you got a one room for me, Gail? I'll go. But they're not going to go to the shelter. So I'm so tired of building increased shelters with 14 or 8 even in a room. One person, one room, and then you do get people to buy in, and then you get the psychiatric, the social worker, and the medication. The medication works.
Yes, ma'am.
Ruby Bastola, John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My question is, with stricter immigration policies under a Trump presidency, how can New York City make sure immigrant students feel safe in schools?
I mean, who wants to jump in on that? I mean, you cover immigrant-heavy communities, and you saw resentments, against migrants and what the city had. This is difficult stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that we, have sanctuary city laws that have been on the books for a number of years.
Which are going to be under attack, from what the Trump people say.
Right, which could make New York City a target. Mayor Eric Adams has said repeatedly that he hopes the council reconsiders, and now, most recently this weekend, he said that he was looking into any executive order he could find to potentially waive some of the sanctuary city laws. It's a little unclear what legally he could do through executive order. To be clear, ICE can operate as it wishes within the confines of New York City. They regularly deport people who serve their sentences in prison, and there's coordination on a state level with people who are released from prison. So if you do time in a serious enough way that you are sent to upstate, you are then fast-tracked for deportation as it stands. So there are protections for New York City if you are, for example, well, you can no longer be arrested for jaywalking, but up until recently, you could be. And in a jurisdiction that's not New York City, if you were a student, that could get you turned over into the hands of ICE before you had been possibly convicted or had your day in trial. So those protections are still in place. But I think it is a question around how those laws will be followed under the income, or with Mayor Eric Adams, who's indicated a real willingness to work with federal immigration authorities on their goals.
If you read Project 2025, which I've read part of, which is the kind of Trump campaign plan that he said he doesn't know anything about, and then appointed all its authors to his administration, I mean, there's some severe rounding up of people that they have called for which would strip away the sanctuary city aspects that for us date back to Ed Koch's time. I mean, this is.
But I think the mayor's clever in talking about tweaking a sanctuary statute law for persons who are criminal aliens who committed crimes in New York. He's not talking about the woman who's selling candy in the subway or selling hats on the street, or a person working in a bodega. He's talking about persons who commit actual crimes and ought to then be, because...
But at what point in the process, I guess? Because if you are arrested, you could have been wrongfully arrested, right?
Yes, he misspoke. First of all, I think he talks out of his hat many times. And when he answered that one question, he forgot that it's due process. And what tends to transpire is that when a person has had his or her due process and they make a plea, and we forget that most of the DAs in New York are concerned with collateral consequences for persons who are immigrants, who are illegal immigrants, undocumented people, so that their guilty plea doesn't trigger automatic deportation. And so there are a number of different levels of protecting, criminal aliens in New York that that the mayor wants to take a look at. He's not talking about going after and assisting the federal government in rounding up immigrants across the city.
What's upsetting to me is having gone to hundreds of graduations, guess who the valedictorians are?
Or
The
immigrants.
DACA students, right? The immigrants. It's across the board. It's across the board. And so I wish, I mean, I understand that we, understand about people who committed crimes. I worry because you could also have a, DOI, DEI, whatever it is, drunk, and get deported for that. I just want to say, for the students, we've got your back. We're going to really, really make sure that the students and the families who deserve to be here stay.
It's immigrants and immigrant labor that helped New York City recover from the last time the city felt this bleak in the 1980s and the 1990s. The recovery was driven by immigrant labor at all sectors of the economy.
Go back to when our people came in 1910.
And if immigrants decide this is not a hospitable place to be, they're not going to come. My best student at Rutgers Newark, one of my very best, she moved to Canada. She was a DACA kid. She came out for the shadows. She played by the rules. She said, I'm too tired of being scared. She is now living in Canada. It's our loss.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, ma'am.
This will be my final question. What would you guys say to students that are becoming dissuaded from acting on their right to vote or being active in their communities?
Well, this is a good question because, and this came up before the presidential election, and our students, when I went to Brooklyn College in the late 1960s, I knew everything. I mean, I knew everything. And now, of course, I know, I knew nothing. And, there's a, do students understand that by not voting, throwing their hands up and not voting, are they essentially, they're going to have to live with the results of these decisions?
I would say, yes, local elections aren't as sexy as the national presidential race, but you can actually see your impact.
More, it has more to do with your daily life.
So if you want to feel I totally get the futility of casting a vote in New York, where it's almost a foregone conclusion that the state is going to go one way or the other in national elections. That is not the case on local races. You personally, if you put your mind to it, you could probably get your pick of city councilor because it really is a block by block community building, and you can then impact policy sort of in little ways. If you want to feel like you have an impact on your community, it might be easier than trying to change things on the national scale.
My friend who's Latina won in Boston for the city council by 1 vote.
Yeah. No, right? I mean, yeah, there's regularly incredibly close council elections.
But yet we have much lower turnout in municipal elections than we have in the presidential elections, even though we're 49th out of 50 cities on the presidential. It's that much lower.
This can come back to haunt Democrats in New York City, by the way. For recent years, Democrats have gone en masse to canvass in Pennsylvania, and they spent election season working in Pennsylvania. The last couple elections made clear to Democrats, I would hope, that winning New York City and winning New York State is not something they can take for granted. If they want to continue to win elections, they're going to have to get more focused in their activity in New York City and in New York State.
And grow the party. Well, They have to grow Democrats have to grow their party. Republicans have to grow their party. And Republicans are on an upswing in doing that. My council member up in the Bronx is Kristen Mayoral, a Republican.
Very nice.
Who defeat very competent, very competent council member. And they've had little victories here and there. And I think that's going to impel even more better qualified candidates to run across districts in the Bronx, in Brooklyn. I wanted to mention earlier that in Queens, Toby Stavisky, the state senator, had a very close race with a Republican Chinese woman, Yatin Chu. I think in 2026, Chu might be able to defeat her or a Democrat who runs at that time, because that's out there. It's a possibility. I think that's on the Republicans to continue to grow their party within the immigrant community, whether it's immigrant community from Central Latin America, from Eastern Europe, from Asia. There's that opportunity because there is sort of a melding of policy that they're in agreement with.
It's also, when I worked at New York Newsday, I covered the census, and I remember in 1990, it was the first time that Puerto Ricans were less than 50% of the Latino population. And to the degree that demography drives an issue agenda, what's the difference between Puerto Ricans and every other Latino immigrant is that Puerto Ricans are citizens. You know, Puerto Rican, and all of a sudden, immigration and citizenship questions, with, you know, mainly at that point was the rise of the Dominican community, but now, you know, now it's a pan-Latin American population. It drives, you know, it drives immigration up. That kind of change in New York drives an issue agenda. And I suspect we're going to continue to see it. You know, and, you know, we've elected Republican mayors, setting aside LaGuardia. Rudy Giuliani, who was a pro-choice, pro-gun control, relatively moderate Republican. Michael Bloomberg, who was a Republican because he needed a party to run on. I mean, he was not a real Republican. But we do have in our memory Republicans who've been elected. Can a Republican get elected next year?
I think the Republicans were crazy to run Curtis Sliwa as a mayoral nominee in the last election. He was an incredibly weak candidate. If they had nominated somebody who was strong, Joe Lhota could have been a strong mayoral candidate, but he ran against being against stop and frisk. If he had run on his record at the MTA and getting the city running again, he would have been a much more credible candidate.
He's a very credible guy.
They have to take running for mayor seriously and put up a serious candidate.
And you said earlier, Rob, that there needs to be a crisis for New York
Yes.
to respond
Yeah.
to a Republican or conservative candidate who shows that he or she can be the person of the hour to make life better. So if Republicans don't want to run Curtis Sliwa, a Republican of, in your view, better standing and more seriousness were to run, it's a possibility they could do that. But from what I'm hearing so far, I haven't heard anyone other than Curtis.
Well, I liked, my favorite was John Katsimatidis, who's, you know, who's a businessman and owns radio stations and Gristedes. When they asked him, you know, was he going to run, he said no because he thought he might win. So, but I do think that, you know, there's been talk about Joe Borelli, who's the minority leader in the city council, pretty credible guy from
Very
Staten
credible,
Island.
very credible.
Smart.
There's a guy named John Burnett, who's from the Bronx, I believe, who ran for comptroller some time ago. He posted on Facebook a picture of the New York Roadrunner shirt that says "Run NYC," and he said maybe I should in 2025. So I don't know if there was something more to that than just a joke, but you know, other than I have not seen anybody other than Curtis Sliwa who has jumped in.
Neither have I. Yeah.
So, do you see dramatic changes coming in the city council? I mean, the council has been assertive, but it still is a mayor-centric government.
Yeah, we have a good leader right now. Adrian Adams, very competent. There are about 12, I think, you know better than I can ever remember, leaving because of term limits. And I guess who comes in, whether they have same age. It's a very young. I'm the oldest member of the city council right now, which is always kind of weird for me. But I think that I think it's going to be a rough time till we really know who the mayor is. In other words, it's a very unstable feeling like who's it going to be? Because normally it's a two-term mayor, right? And it's the city council has its turnover, but it's a two-term mayor. Obviously, with Dinkins, where I worked, it was a different story. But that's normally what it is. And so it's sort of unsettling. Like I said, government continues. You know, legislation gets passed. A budget will get passed in the coming year.
But I mean, except that budget being passed, I mean, you know, I referenced the potential out-year budget gaps, which are very large.
The out-year, yeah, but having done this forever, it's going to be a fairly strong, I think, according to many people with the Wall Street folks. Bonuses are very high, so we may end up with some money as opposed to the fears. It always ends up with terrible out years, but when you get to the out year, it often works itself out. Not to say we have
when I covered
too much
City
money.
Hall. When I covered City Hall, it was under Dinkins and Koch and into Giuliani. The city owned the UN hotel, and they always had to fill a $300 million gap. And so every year they said they were going to sell the UN hotel, and they never did. So there's a lot of budget. There's a lot of budget gamesmanship.
There's
going
a
on.
lot of budget gamesmanship.
As
yes.
well as out years are always out years.
Yes.
So no matter where you are in the budget and what point in time, it's always the out years that you're looking at that we never seem to get to. But I find it interesting that the lefties on the city council who rail against Wall Street cheer when the Wall Street revenue comes in to allow them to then spend more of our money on projects that in the view of many voters and myself, doesn't necessarily result in anything positive for ordinary New Yorkers, in my view.
I always say yay to the budgets because I've been doing a lot of budgets and I want the bonuses. I always say yay to the bonus because it does provide more funding for the programs that we care about. It's hard to know what to cut. There probably are things to cut, but it's not clear. So we end up with more programs.
We have less than 2 minutes to go, and with the municipal elections coming up and with Trump coming in, should we be afraid of the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration in formation? Are we going to be in a state of resistance? I mean, I don't know who wants to touch this.
I don't think people should be afraid, but they should take the rhetoric very, very seriously. When they say they're going to do stuff, plan that they're really going to do stuff. If they don't, then that's great. But I think people should take the claims the Trump administration makes very seriously. It's not a game show.
And I would say it's just such a different moment than it was in 2016, where I think Democrats were extremely flabbergasted by the Trump win. This time, folks are kind of going underground, it seems like, and this strategizing, whereas in that moment it was all about, very public resistance and sanctuary this and sanctuary that. The organizing that I have heard happening is happening underground, and they don't want coverage of it. And it's sort of what will happen in the shadows. I think that will be interesting to watch.
Last time we went on a big march, almost the next day, and we're not marching.
The next day.
Yes, and what we're doing is, at least in terms of my work, is working with legal aid and working to find out where we can get the attorneys for those migrants who could end up in a difficult situation. So it's a different kind of organizing. It's practical organizing for what could happen.
We're about running.
I was going to say, I don't think it'll be as harmful as people are making it.
Well, we're about running out of time, and just want to tell you all, as somebody from Brooklyn, to vote early and vote often next year. So thank you. We'll see you next time on the CUNY Forum. Thank you.